While I was out here in Arizona driving the all-new 2020 Sonata, they were able to give me a sneak peek of this vehicle right over here. Come with me and we're going to take a look at this camoed Sonata N-Line. Now, Hyundai has decided to go after performance a little bit differently than some manufacturers. Instead of just jamming a higher horsepower engine under the hood of the Sonata, like Toyota does with the Camry or Honda does with the Accord, Hyundai decided to make this an N-Line trim. So this is not a full-on N like we see in the Veloster lineup, so no body changes. There aren't too many structural changes to the vehicle, but we do get some wider tires, we get some tweaked suspension bits, some tweaked looks up front, so more aggressive front end look. It's different than what we see in the Sonata. We'll know a bit more when this goes on sale later in the fall of 2020 about all the exact specifics and all the exact changes, but we do have unique tires, the largest wheels that are available on the Sonata. These are 19-inch wheels in this model, wrapped in 245 with tires. And then as we move on down the vehicle, you can see that the overall character line style is exactly the same as the rest of the Sonata. Again, no sheet metal changes. But if we come all the way back to the rear, you'll notice that the rear bumper does change and we get these quad exhaust tips down at the bottom rather than the two exhaust tips just on the passenger side. Under the hood is where the big change happens. We have an all-new 2.5-liter turbocharged engine. This is a brand new engine for the Hyundai family, and we will likely see this in other vehicles going forward. In this particular vehicle, this engine will produce 290 horsepower estimated and about 310 pound-feet of torque. That is going to make this one of the torquiest engines in this segment and one of the highest horsepowers in this segment as well. Horsepower does come in a little bit below the Camry, but we get considerably more torque out of this engine. So this combo is probably going to make this one of the fastest vehicles, if not the fastest vehicle, in the mid-size segment. Sending all that power to the ground is an all-new 8-speed wet dual-clutch transmission. This is very different than the 7-speed DCT that we've seen in other Hyundai vehicles before. Not only is it an all-new design, but the important distinction is that this uses wet clutches, which means it's going to be an awful lot smoother. So this uses the same basic design that we see, for instance, in some modern Audi dual-clutch transmissions. The one thing enthusiasts will certainly notice is missing under this hood is all-wheel drive. It's not available in the N-Line, not available in the 2020 Sonata at all. So if you want a higher horsepower turbocharged engine under your hood and all-wheel drive in your midsize family sedan, the Subaru Legacy really is going to be your only option. On the inside, there are, of course, subtle changes for the N-Line, but the structure of the vehicle remains the same as the rest of the Sonata lineup. So we have red stitching on the doors, on the steering wheel, and on portions of the dashboard as well. This gets Hyundai's latest instrument cluster. It's a 12.3-inch full LCD instrument cluster. We then have a 10.25-inch infotainment system to the right of that. This is one of the largest that you'll find in this segment. Definitely one of the biggest screen real estate totals that you'll find in this segment as well. Paddle shifters on the back of the steering wheel. Those look pretty aggressive overall. And then their push-button shifter arrangement in the center console. Very similar to what we see in the rest of the Sonata line. The N-Line trim gets much more aggressive front seats than you'll really find in any other mainstream midsize sedan. You can really see how aggressive these bolsters are, both on the seat back cushion and on the seat bottom cushion. These seats are perforated because they are ventilated, and the center is this sort of Alcantara-like suede fabric. The passenger seat over here, I don't know if this particular option is going to come to America, but we do have buttons to actually move that seat forward and backward for the rear passenger. So if you just have people sitting in the rear and you want them to be able to scoot the seat forward or backward, they'll be able to do that right there on the seat. Hopefully that option does come to the US. I haven't been able to sit in these seats very long, but I can say that I do find them an awful lot more comfortable than some sport seats out there. Even though the bolstering is pretty aggressive on the back and bottom, it is a little bit adjustable. So there's actually a power knob right there, so you can adjust the side bolstering right there around my waist. You can relax it, you can make it a little bit tighter, but this is definitely sized for an American driver. It's not designed for a really petite person. That's something that I definitely appreciate, especially in the shoulder area here, where we get more aggressive shoulder bolstering, but it's definitely suitable still for an adult male driver. Now obviously the first thing you're going to notice out on the road is the extra power that we get out of the N-Line engine. Again, almost 300 horsepower and over 300 pound-feet of torque, making that combined figure one of the best in this segment. There are other manufacturers that will give you more horsepower, there are other manufacturers that will give you more torque, but nobody will give you more torque and more horsepower. We don't have any official 0 to 60 numbers just yet, but I expect that thanks to this combination of power and torque and the lightweight that we find in the Sonata overall, this is probably going to be a hair faster than the Camry or the Accord Turbo. Now, Hyundai of course won't tell us officially what they think the 0 to 60 times will be. We'll have to wait until we can get our hands on one of these back at home later in the 2020 calendar year for that official number. I haven't had very long to drive this vehicle, but I have to say that so far I've been pretty impressed with this new wet clutch, dual clutch transmission. This feels an awful lot more like an Audi than those initial Volkswagen products or the last generation Hyundai DCT. And the wet clutch system is really the reason for that. That allows a lot more clutch slip. It allows it to feel a little bit more like a car with a torque converter. Now, in low speed stop and go or slow and go situations, this is still going to feel a little bit different than Hyundai's 8-speed automatic transmission that you'll find in the rest of the Sonata lineup, but the difference is an awful lot smaller than it has been before. Now at this point you might be thinking, why didn't Hyundai just use the regular 8-speed automatic that's in the rest of the Sonata lineup? Well, there are a few reasons that you might want to get a DCT instead. Obviously it's the more sporting choice. The shifts are going to be much faster. It also is going to feel more direct and more like a manual transmission because it is a manual transmission. Although again, we haven't officially tested this model yet, it's probably going to be faster than the competition because the DCT can shift faster than a traditional stepped automatic like we find in the Toyota or the Honda, or a CVT like we find in the Subaru. Overall, this feels an awful lot more like a grown-up GTI than just a family sedan with a bigger engine under the hood. One thing that I've certainly noticed during my short time out here on the road has been, A, the suspension is definitely firmer than the regular Sonata. So there definitely been some suspension changes in order to turn this into the N-Line. And that's a big difference between the Camry and the Accord when you step up into their more powerful engines. They don't really change the suspension. It feels basically the same as the regular models with a bigger engine under the hood. So again, if you're looking for that more sporty driving dynamic, this is definitely going to be the option that you might want to choose. Now, a lot of folks have asked about this versus something like the Mazda 6. The important thing to remember about the Mazda 6, even with the turbocharged engine, is that Mazda has not done anything with the suspension, and Mazda has awfully skinny tires for this segment as well. So this is likely going to significantly out-handle that Mazda 6 with the turbo. I have to admit that the last time we drove that Mazda 6, I was a little bit disappointed in the turbo. It's notably slower than the Camry and the Accord 0 to 60. It doesn't handle quite as well as the Camry or the Accord. It has a good steering feel overall, which I have to say feels a little bit more communicative than what we find here in this Hyundai, but the rest of the experience really does fall below this and of course the Camry and the Accord. There are a lot of different reasons for that, but one of the important reasons that performance especially is below most of the competition in that Mazda is because they're still using an old 6-speed automatic and it's quite heavy. That means that if you're looking for a more powerful mid-size sedan in America and you don't want to break your budget, you have very few options, and this is going to be by far the sportiest of them. You could get more power and a softer suspension tune if you're going to be driving on rough roads, but if you want that more sporty, more engaging driving experience, this really is going to be your only option in America. At this point in time, there are still a lot of details that we don't know for the Sonata N-Line, but we do know that this is going to be available for sale in fall of 2020. We will be getting more details as this gets a little bit closer to the on-sale date, and we obviously will be able to see it without the camo on it. But I expect it to look an awful lot like this red Sonata right next to it, with the exception, of course, of the unique wheels and the unique bumpers up front and on the side. That is definitely going to make this one of the more interesting looking options in this segment. Now, I have to admit that the one thing that I do think is missing from the Sonata N-Line for 2020 is all-wheel drive. Hyundai tells us that there were a variety of different reasons that they did not put all-wheel drive on this model. Among them were overall cost, the center of gravity, because the center of gravity would go up if they added all-wheel drive, and of course it would have made the rest of the Sonata lineup a little bit more expensive to put that kind of development into a single niche trim like this N-Line. Now, I don't think that's too much of a problem really, because the only high horsepower all-wheel drive entry in this segment is the Subaru Legacy. The Legacy is not the same thing as the N-Line, however. It is not a sportier tuned trim, it's just a Subaru with a more powerful engine under the hood. So it's an awful lot softer, it's higher off the ground, it's not going to handle like the N-Line. It's not going to feel as special on the inside either. Those N-Line unique front seats are definitely a big differentiation between this and the rest of the competition. Be sure to let me know what you think about all that down there in the comment section below, and of course, stay tuned for our full review just as soon as we can get our hands on one of these. And in the meantime, be sure and check out our video on the 2020 Sonata. I'll see you later.